feeling good, can I tell?
Okay, Hotel family, my name is Brother Ray Ray.
All right.
Welcome to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr.'s History Club. We meet here every other Wednesday in honor. But before we go on, we want to give a moment of silence for our brother, Sekou, who made his transition, and they had the services today up in New Rochelle. Me, Brother Mike, and Trust was there, and a whole lot of people, and it was an excellent event. So we're going to give a moment of silence for Brother Sekou, and we're going to give a moment of silence for Sister Collier Clark. Sister Collier Clark made her transition too, and we'll be getting the information on the services for her, so we're going to give a moment of silence for Sister Collier Clark, and she never got the recognition that she was supposed to get. So we want to give a moment of silence. Thank you very much. So we meet here every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., Dr. Professor Amos Wilson, Louis Ray Rivera, El Haj Malik Shabazz, Brother Gil Noble, Minister Khalid Abdul Muhammad, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ivan Van Sertmer,
Hello, Librod.
Professor Scobie, and all the people, Brother Harold, Sister Leola Maddox, and all the people that gave up fame and fortune because they believed in giving information to the community. They sacrificed a lot. So we meet here. We never want to let these people be forgotten. And for the audience that came out, give yourself a big hand for coming out and supporting the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. There's one thing about Sister Leola in her honor. She drove an old car all the way from Teaneck, New Jersey to the United African Movement. And she believed in bringing people together and bringing information and having speakers come. So we don't want to forget her. And that's why we bring these lectures. So I have a couple of books in honor of the Amos collection. This is the Helps of Babu in African World Info Systems. We have Amos's classic, Blueprint for Black Power. Also, Black on Black Violence, the psychodynamic of black self-annihilation in service of white domination. You hear a lot of things about black on black violence. Nobody never mentions this Amos. The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat toward a Reclamation of the African Mind. So Babu just finished this. It's an excellent. So we have that. And these books are for the audience to read and learn. The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children, The Falsification of African Consciousness, African-Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order, Issues of Manhood in Black and White, in honor of Louis Reyes Rivera, who used to come down here and speak at the Mackey's group, him and Brother Sekou, for hours when we moved from 851 St. Mark's. And Mackey made his transition, though, to keep his name alive. We got Jazz in jail. Brother Earl Ponder, he passed away and he left a whole bunch of books. So he wrote a book revealing the unspeakable Bible verses, truth about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the Holy Trinity. Distorted Truth, the Bastardization of African Cosmology. S.K. Damian Akruam. Now we have some other books. That you could get and read and get information. Brother Edwin Black, The Transfer Agreement, the untold story of the secret pact between the Third Reich and Jewish Palestine. Tim Wise, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son. Sister Carol Alexander, The Unspoken Truth About Racial Divide, White Rage. Dirt, Terrence McLaughlin, A Social History as Seen Through the Use and Abuse of Dirt. This tells you a lot about European history. And I just picked up, you see all the stuff going on in Georgia, but we will never forget what happened to our sister Cynthia McKinney. In her book, When China Sneezes, From the Coronavirus Lockdown to the Global Political Economic Crisis. Sister Cynthia McKinney. Anybody that we hope will have been running for office in Georgia?
That's right.
Sister Cynthia McKinney is the only one that cares about the people.
That's right.
The only one. In honor of Dr. Ben. You have too many computers. Black man of the Nile and his family. And Charles Hamilton Houston and the struggle for civil rights. So we have these books, and you could get them. Dr. Randy Short, The Impact of Religious Slavery Revealed. And War on the Horizon, The Irritated Genie. James are the Problem. You could get his book on War on the Horizon. Dr. Scott Whitaker, Medicine, the Causes and Solutions to the Disease, Malnutrition, and the Medical Sins that are Killing Us. Dr. Scott Whitaker out of Georgia. And these two books are excellent information on COVID, the jab, the truth about COVID-19 by Dr. Joseph McCullough and Ronald Cummins. And the blockbuster bestseller on the New York Times, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. When you read this book, you won't be asking too many questions. It's one of the best books, and I'm still reading it. It's going to take a long time for me to finish it. So we have these books. Now I'm going to give you some community events that people in the community throughout the tri-state area are having. Ted, Keisha, Brother Black, and Ashay. Thorough Black Talk. They come on every Saturday, every Thursday, and they're on Facebook Live. Also, that's at 8 o'clock. Calmonte Live, Sankofa Radio. WSYP LP out of Birmingham, Alabama. That's at 10 o'clock. Sankofa Radio. Also, on Saturdays at 10:30, Blog Talk Radio. Sister Empress Chi and our Philadelphia family has an excellent program. Blog Talk Radio, you type in Empress Chi at Blog Talk. You stroll down the New Day Resurrection, and Sister Empress and our Philadelphia family comes in at 10:30 Saturday. Excellent program, and you can even call in. Also, Dr. Aline, Your Immunity Project, has a program come on every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Put your email in the chat, and I'll send you the information. Also, Minefield with Dr. McIntosh on 99.5 WBAI. That comes on Wednesday, I believe at 2 o'clock. It's called Minefield. That's an extra. Tuesdays. No, it comes on Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
Comes on Wednesday at 2 o'clock or 99.5 Minefield with Dr. McIntosh. And also, if you Google Simotap, here to tell you all the information that the Simotap organization is doing. So, Fridays, African Echoes, our Newark, New Jersey connection with Brother Trust Graham. They have a study group come on Fridays at 8 o'clock. Excellent program. They're doing the psychology of self-hatred for the reclamation of the African mind. Amos's classic. And on Saturday, the Know Thyself study group with Brother True and the boys from Asbury Park. Trust also is the mediator of that group. That comes on Saturdays at, I believe, 1:30, and they're doing the destruction of black civilization, Chancellor Williams. Now, family, if you want to see all the lectures from the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr.'s History Club, you go on YouTube, and all the lectures will come up. And also, on Tuesdays at 5 o'clock, Brother Mike Graves, Noel Leader, and Julian Harper, the Community Cop Family on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And if you go on YouTube, you can see all of their lectures and their videos from that program. And this one that they did, the last one that they did, they're back after a couple of weeks. But if you go on YouTube, you can see that program and hit Community Cop. And that program will come up, and they just did it, and it is excellent. So you can go on YouTube and see that. So those are just events that we have, so the community in New York and the tri-state area could get involved and see what's going on. So last week we had Dr. Monderson do the awesome African Egyptian temples, part 1. And he said he wanted to come back and do part 2. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen in the Zoom audience and our audience live at 103 Quincy Street, give Dr. Monderson a great big hand, and he's going to do awesome Egyptian temple. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Mackey, and hooked up to the African Mackey lecture series audience on Zoom. I'm going to get right into it. I think I need to bring you somewhat up to date on who I am and what I've been doing. I was once, G2 WC had wanted me to run against Clarence Norman when he was district leader, and it never panned out. And Una Clark, who was city council, had often said to me, Monderson, why don't you come out from under the radar? I said, well, I couldn't because I was doing so much stuff. So I wanted to sort of bring you up to date about some of the things that I've been doing so that you know that we're all heading in the right direction, in the same direction, but most of the time we are in a different lane and we never connect, whether through intentions or the need to network. I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure if I made you aware of this is an evidence of my 10th Memorial Day tribute to Dr. Ben, which was in 2017. I was, like most people, I was dislocated as a result of COVID, and I have not been able to get back to this series. It's interesting that I'm asked to speak about Egyptian temples today. First of all, let me just point this out, because in 1986, I was a part of the leadership in the fight against apartheid, and here I am on the front page of the Daily Challenge. I wrote in 1992 the Afrocentric response to the invasion of Somalia when the United States was attempting to capture General Adid. I wrote that and I got good reviews from Temple's Molefi Asante. I wrote the opening statement on Black Solidarity Day back in, let me get my bicycle here, back in 1997, which is some of the work I was doing. In March of 1997, I was at Reverend Al Sharpton's earlier address on Madison Avenue, and I wrote, Egyptologist discusses the origins of man in Africa. I was writing for 3 newspapers in Brooklyn. The Daily Challenge, where I was writing on Egyptian temples back in 1998. That same year, I was also writing for the New American newspaper, the 25th Ethiopian Dynasty. You will notice that for the most part I was carrying the newspaper. I don't mean to be facetious, but that's what was happening. I was writing for the Daily Challenge. You could see the volume of work that I was doing. I was being paid. I didn't do it for payment. This one is interesting because not only is it a tribute to Amun-Ra, but Dr. Ben wrote to the Daily Challenge on March 1, 2000. And if you'll pardon me, let me read what he said. Today I recognize Brother Frederick Monderson as a stalwart in the field of Egyptological Nile Valley research. Fred Monderson has been a student of mine since 1972. He possesses many of my works in first edition that with the deepest appreciation I subsequently endorsed. Having read my books and traveled to Egypt, ancient Kemet with me on several occasions, Brother Monderson has written nearly 400 pieces on African history and local social, political, community matters. These were published in your city's only black daily newspaper, which is he's writing to the editor of the Daily Challenge. In this period of black social consciousness, he has enlightened the black community on efficacy and significance of African history and culture. The Afro Times and New American newspapers were also vehicles in this undertaking. In manner reminiscent of my efforts and with the style that I endorse, Brother Monderson has borne the torch of black enlightenment in New York with dignity and a revolutionary fervor that I admire. Years ago on one of my Dr. Lewis's dinners, honoring my efforts, I'm reminded of Fred Monderson's statement, Dr. Ben, as you move along life's paths and your vision becomes cloudy, and you look for someone to pass a baton to, look for Brother Monderson, for I'll be there. On one of my tour of Egypt in the summer of 1997, participants were given an assignment in Karnak Temple. Mr. Monderson's assignment had been to locate and report on the name of Ramses III in that enclosure and elsewhere on the tour. While somewhat disappointed with the reports or lack thereof from the other students, I was impressed with Brother Monderson's studiousness and attention to historical detail of his assignment, Ramses III. My response was, everyone failed except Mr. Monderson. Well, perhaps you and you. There is a tape recording of the statement. The author of several books on ancient Kemet Egypt, consistent with the dynamics of African historiographic reconstruction, I endorse the efforts of Fred Monderson continued research and his endeavor as a tour guide to the land of ancient Kemet. It is my firmest belief he will enlighten our people and educate them further regarding the strength, significance, and utility of the ancient Nile Valley heritage. With respect and warm affection, I close. Dr. Yosef Hanan is a researcher, Black African nationalist, author, lecturer, tour guide, Elder Harlem resident. So this is, that's where, so you have the Daily Challenge, the New American, the Afro Times. Again, here's another piece on, in the Daily Challenge, on Egyptian temples, this time Karnak, the majestic architecture of ancient Kemet. I wrote the plan of the temple, explaining how you get there. Also, in this plan of the temple, I numbered the columns in the various temples and give you a description of the structural features of the temple. This was done back in '97, so I've come full circle. Here's a further part of that plan. I provided an architectural glossary. I say this to say that I've been busy, sort of under the radar, and was able to run a score of work and information that is on record that our people have benefited from and will remain available as we go forward. I'm speaking towards your children and your grandchildren. They will have this information available. Now, having said all of that, thank you very much. I wanted to point out the two images to my left and right. I'm a Vietnam veteran. This is one of my classic pieces that I'm preparing to donate to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. This is my Black Army here. You will notice my name is right across here. And just above me is Brother Brown, my partner who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. I was both chairman of the Bones Committee for Sonny Carson, whose ancestor was relocated back to Ghana, West Africa, to create a site of pilgrimage for African Americans seeking their roots in Africa. We opened the door of return. Everyone is familiar with the door of no return, but in repatriating Samuel Carson, we opened the door of return. Samuel Carson was an enslaved African in South Carolina who escaped, joined the Navy, fought in the Mexican War of 1844, was killed and buried in the Brooklyn Navy Yard that at that time was a segregated black cemetery. In 1926, the Navy moved most of the bones from the Navy Yard into Cypress Hill Cemetery, which is a part of the National Cemetery structure. What I was able to secure is the names of some nearly 250 black veterans who were buried in the Navy Yard. I have the name of a Marine who was buried in 1801. Much of the, when they say 44 or 68, we're not talking about 1968, we're talking about 1868. So the interesting thing is that if the descendants of those people whose names are in the book, Sonny Carson, The Final Triumph, if they can show that they are connected to these veterans who were buried, the government owes them money for their salaries, and multiplied by the time period based on a set figure of interest. So we're talking about a lot of money that the government owes these people. Okay, now having said all of that, I want to discuss my topic. Oh yeah, so I've shown you some of the New American articles that I've written. I had mentioned this before. I was in Harlem and this brother approached me and he said that, well, I run this culture center in Harlem, but I never heard of you. And I asked him if he had heard of the Daily Challenge. He said, never heard of it. And I said to him, well, you missed over 1,000 pieces that I wrote for them. These are some of the pieces in the Daily Challenge that I have written. And the interesting thing I would like to show you as a piece of eye candy, if you will. This is the world's earliest bracelet found in the tomb of the wife of a first dynasty king. Dr. Jack Fellows, some of you know him. He was really intrigued when he communicated to me about reading this particular piece. He was so fascinated with this world's earliest bracelet. So these are some of the things that I've written for that newspaper. So having said all of that, sort of introducing myself, I want to discuss my topic today, which is Egyptian temples. Before I begin in that particular direction, let me say this, that we must revere the ancestors. We must revere those among us who are continuing to struggle on the battlefield of today's onslaught. In the Declaration of Innocence, in the psychostasia judgment that happens in the next rite, when we are weighed in the balance, it is said by the deceased that I am pure, my mouth is pure, my hands are pure. Much of that behavior is dictated by the philosophy of Ma'at. Ma'at is a combination of truth, justice, and righteousness, as well as balance and order. It's designed to regulate social behavior to ensure success and prestige in individual life. And it insists, where the learner's attitude is hostile, no instruction can proceed or succeed. And also, when the student is ready, then the master or the teacher will appear. So you got to be ready to absorb the knowledge imparted to you, otherwise it's a failed mission. In Egyptian society, Ma'at is a concept of central importance. It implies order, universal balance, cosmic regulation, justice, truth, injustice, rectitude, and moral uprightness. The concept of balanced order brings peace. It condemns crime and evil. Whoever breaks the law is punished as a matter of course. Ma'at castigates slander, lying, defamation, boastfulness, and flattery. We must understand the oppressor wants to destroy the history and the memory of the African people. This was never happened. The great scholar and visionary, Dr. Theophilo Benga, Dr. Diop's research assistant, insisted we must continue to invoke the names of our ancestral heroes. In every undertaking, we must invoke and utter the names of Nkrumah, Garvey, Mandela, Winnie, Malcolm, Paul Verner, Kofi, Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Ben Carruthers, Sonny Carson, Gita Rusi, Bill Lynch, David Dinkins, Michael Jackson, Fannie Lou Hamer, Elambe Black, Asa Hillard, Ferguson, Betty Shabazz, Mary McLeod Bethune, Mika Monderson, and so many others. Equally too, I'm underscoring the significance of ancestral heritage in their contribution to advancing the cause of humanity. Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop instructed. He said, notwithstanding the opinion of Andre Siegfried, the black African is clearly capable of creating technique. He's the very one who first created it at a time when all the white races steeped in barbarism, were barely fit for civilization. When we say that the ancestors of the blacks, who today live mainly in black Africa, were the first to invent mathematics, astronomy, the calendar, sciences in general, arts, religion, agriculture, social organization, medicine, writing, technique, architecture, that they were the first to erect buildings out of 6 million tons of stone, the Great Pyramid. As architects and engineers, not as laborers, they built the immense temple of Karnak. That forest of columns with its famed hypostyle hall, large enough to hold Notre Dame and its towers. That they sculpted the first colossal statues, the Colossus of Memnon. When we say that we are merely expressing the plain, unvarnished truth that no one today can refute by arguments worthy of the name. Consequently, the black man must become able to restore the continuity of his national historic past, to draw from his moral advantage needed to reconquer his place in the modern world, without falling into the excesses of a Nazism in reverse. For insofar as one will speak of a race, the civilization that is his might have been created by any other human race placed in so favorable and unique a setting. So, let me get to my topic. I'd like to speak today about the Egyptian temple. Currently, on the tourist circuit, there are a number of temples that have survived the ravages of time and man. And I like to do this in sort of a chronological manner. In that respect, I can begin with the 11th Dynasty Temple of Mentuhotep II that is located at Deir el-Bahari at Thebes in Upper Egypt, today Luxor. This is the 11th Dynasty Temple. The Karnak temple that we visit and spend so much time with, I have a couple of books on that, has evidence of a 12th dynasty open court with an altar that has survived, again, the ravages of time. What this seems to say is that, and interestingly enough, the 11th dynasty temple is oriented towards the Karnak temple, which seems to say that that 11th dynasty temple at that site antedated the 12th dynasty temple that went into disuse and gained prominence after the 17th dynasty and the 18th dynasty, the emergence of the 17th dynasty, the start of the 18th dynasty, the New Kingdom, when Ahmose and Amenhotep I, then Thutmose I, he is the one who erected 2 obelisks in Karnak, and the temple began to be expanded. Then his daughter Hatshepsut also erected 2 in the immediate vicinity of her father, and 2 in the rear of the temple. And the 2 in the rear of the temple were lost. The 2 that she erected beside her father's 2, one still remains. One, the zenith of another, was moved towards the sacred lake, which is a sacred lake is a source of water for all temples. For example, just bear with me here. So at Karnak we have a sacred lake that is a square structure with water in it, of course. The adjacent temple of Mut, the sacred lake, is a kind of a horseshoe structure or body of water. At Denderot, there is a surviving sacred lake, and at Deir el-Bahari's, Hatshepsut temple at Deir el-Bahari's, there were a series of lakes that she created, and which she called ponds of milk, that the god, in walking through the garden that she prepared, in the run-up to her temple, he could enjoy that. You have to understand, we're in a desert environment. So she called it ponds of milk, but it's water. And it's interesting, in another context, I talked about the creation of water. We are often told that the Nile is the only source of water, but psychological and mentally, in the mythology, various pools of water were created by these Africans because water is such a life-giving force. You must remember that when the God first created, Dr. Obengla said that divinity stepped out of an alternative universe and stepped into this universe and found uncreated matter, which was water. And with that he began molding everything that we've come to recognize, which I call the five kingdoms. The mineral kingdom, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the human kingdom, and he overlaid it with the divine kingdom. So water is a source of significant importance, especially in a desert environment. So Hatshepsut was the first person. Some temples were built by a single person or several people. Hatshepsut was the first surviving person besides Mentuhotep who built her temple individually. Okay? Karnak temple. And her temple, like her ancestors' temple, was oriented towards, across the river, towards Karnak temple. Karnak temple was the principal New Kingdom temple because it was the home of the god Amun, the sun god, and the temple was oriented on an east to west axis, so that which followed the path of the sun. And most of the temples of that time were in some way or the other oriented towards Karnak temple. So we have Karnak, she began the temple of Mut, Mut was the wife of Amun. Mut, Amun, and their son Khonsu were the Theban triad. So you have a triad of three gods. You have an Enid. An Enid can run from 3 to 15 gods. And then you had an Agdod, which is of 9 gods. In time permits, we'll give you some explanation of what these are. So she built her temple, and she started building the temple of Mut. Beyond these, Amenhotep III, he erected what is called a processional colonnade in Karnak temple, but he also built Luxor temple. He built Luxor temple, but Ramses II came of the 19th dynasty. Amenhotep III was 18th dynasty, the father of Amenhotep IV, then the grandfather of Tutankhamun. Ramses II of the 19th dynasty added to Luxor temple, added a court. It is called the Ramesian front. And he changed the direction of the temple. And it's interesting because Luxor temple has 3 axes. It has an axis that is oriented towards a kiosk that Hatshepsut had built in this vicinity when there was a prior temple. There is an invisible axis on the floor. And Ramses III, in creating the Ramesian front, in addition to Luxor temple, oriented his temple towards Luxor, towards Karnak, excuse me. So we have now, he built individually his Ramuseum, which is his mortuary temple. Now I may have mentioned last week that there were 3 principal types of temples. There is the God or the worship temple. There is the king or the mortuary temple. That is to say, the mortuary temple was a temple where the king was supposed to be worshipped when he died and he went to heaven and he was justified. But sometimes if the king lived long enough and he was strong enough, he could be worshipped while he was still alive, but he would be worshipped in his own temple. And this king worship actually is traceable to the 19th dynasty called the Ramesside period. His father, Ramses' father, Seti I, built his mortuary temple at a place called Karnak. K-U-R-N-A-H. Dr. Ben always spelled out the names so that you don't be confused about it. And in saying that, I want to say that Amun is spelled at least 3 different ways. A-M-O-N, A-M-E-N, A-M-U-N. Amun-Ra, A-M-E-N-R-A, and so forth. He built a temple to the god Osiris at Abydos. Okay, and he repaired a number of other temples that were destroyed in the Ammonian Revolution. It's interesting that his son, Ramses II, came upon much of his father's work that was incomplete, and he completed his father's work. For example, the father gets the greatest credit for the hypostyle hall in Karnak Temple. This is a massive piece of work with 134 columns that was divided into 2 sections adjacent to the same processional colonnade that Amenhotep III created. So they added 2 wings to it. All right. The father got the northern wing, and the son ended up finishing the southern wing. In the northern wing, the most beautiful form of reliefs, raised reliefs, were done by the father, Seti I. And in the south, not so beautiful reliefs, sunk reliefs, were done by the son. Many people argue that it's just 2 different types of architects worked on the 2 different forms of decoration in this hall. An argument holds that Ramses didn't want to upstage his father by creating raised relief decoration in his section, so he chose sunk relief. And the same pattern happened at Abydos, home of Osiris, where the father, if you recall last time, I mentioned that the temple is built out from the sanctuary. Abydos has 2 hypostyle halls. A hypostyle hall, well, there is what is called a peristyle, is an open court surrounded by columns. A hypostyle hall is a hall in a building with a roof. The hypostyle hall is generally where much of the dynamics of the temple occurs. Where when the king and his entourage is heading to the sanctuary, the room where the god is housed, it begins there. The processions begin there. Sometimes the king comes to me, crown is in the hypostyle hall. Abydos has 2 hypostyle halls, an inner and outer. Today it's called, they say it's the first hypostyle hall and the second hypostyle hall. It shouldn't be. But we've got to be careful how sometimes interpretation of names can confuse us, and we get off subject by people for whatever reason. Nevertheless, we use certain types of names for convenience sake. For example, I was at the African Festival and a few years back, I go there every year, and this guy came to my booth, and he was saying that, man, you using the word cartouche, whereas you should be using Shinu, which is the ancient Egyptian name. But the man didn't see 24 books in front of him that I wrote. He, as I often said about Dr. Ben, they criticize him that he missed a comma on page 96. Okay, but they don't see the value of the work that my Reverend has showed us in Black Man and Nihilist Family. So, the first and second hypostyle hall is a reverse of how the building was constructed. You have to understand that the God looks out to bless his creation. And people look in to worship and ritualize the God. So, when Seti I built his temple, he built the sanctuary and the first hypostyle hall. His son comes and builds a second hypostyle hall. Today we call the son's structure the first hypostyle hall, and the father's structure the second hypostyle, which is the reverse. Nevertheless, in the first hypostyle hall, Seti had the same raised relief, and the son had, in the second hypostyle hall, he had the sunk relief. And this is the same thing we see because he finished his father's mortuary temple at Corner, and we see the same dynamic. One choosing one farm. So the argument is credible that he didn't want to upstage his father by choosing the same type of decoration that the father used. So now we have these are individual temples built by a certain person, one person. You could say that Karna, Abydos were built by two people, but technically it's Seti. Ramses built his mortuary temple, the Ramusium. And Ramses III, he built his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. Besides these, there were others that were built by individual kings, but they've been destroyed. We're talking about what's still existing today that you can go in there. And as we go south from Karnak, from Luxor, we enter into the time period of the Greco-Roman temples. It's called Greco-Roman because they were built during the time when the Greeks and the Romans had come to Egypt, but they weren't built by Greeks and Romans. They were built by Egyptians and Nubians under their own specifications under Greek and Roman overlordship. And what had happened was that the Greeks and the Romans wanted to be like Mike. So they're supporting the Egyptians' desire to build temples, but it's called Greco-Roman. But these now were built over a 200-year period. One thing I'd like to interject right now is that because the ancient 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasty structures have suffered tremendously, and they were scantily decorated, we have to go forward to go backward. So we have to look at the Greco-Roman temples, Edfu, Komombo, Esna, Philly. And in that way, because these temples now were inundated with inscriptions. In the 1890 New Kingdom temples, the temples simply had an image of a king worshipping or offering some entity to the divinity. Whereas in the Greco-Roman temples, you have not only images of the kings, but you have inscriptions telling you what about the ritual in the temple. And the walls are decorated, so there's miles and miles and miles of data about the most ancient period. So you have to go forward to the Greeks to go backward to understand much of what we understand about the ancient temples. Now, some temples were dedicated to a single divinity. Some temples were dedicated to a set of divinities. For example, Karnak specifically, and Karnak is a part of a three-section temple. So you have the northern section where the war god Montu was worshipped, the central section where Amun was worshipped, and the southern section where his wife Mut was worshipped. You know, I told you that she had a horseshoe type of sacred lake. So Karnak was dedicated to one single divinity, but he had associate gods who visited or had residence in his temple. And this is called the Ine. Right? So the Theban triad would be Amun, his wife Mut, and their son Khonsu. So Amun is the sun god, the wife Mut is the earth goddess, and the son Khonsu is the moon god. There were 15 members of the Theban Ine, when we say Theban, we mean Amun and Karnak and all of that. I had mentioned before that when we say the sanctuary of the god is over there, we mean the whole structure. When we get into the structure itself, we say the sanctuary is the room in the back where the god lives. Ramses II, he built a temple in Nubia called Abu Simbel. That temple was devoted to 4 gods. So Ra-Horakhti, who was the sun god, Amun, the earliest sun god. And what would happen is that during the New Kingdom, they have this syncretism, that is to say, the combining of a god. So you combine 2 gods, you get a more powerful god. I see your power, and I see this power, and I have your power. All of our power. So you had Ra-Horakhti, Amun, Ptah, and Ramses II as the 4th god in that Abu Simbel temple. His father's temple, Abu Simbel, at Abydos, devoted to Osiris, was devoted to 7 gods. The Osiris triad. The Osiris triad is Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And the 3 gods of the New Kingdom, Ra-Horakhti, Amun, and Ptah. And the 7th god was Seti, made himself a god. So we have Abydos devoted to Osiris, Isis, Set, Horus, Ra-Horakhti, Amun, Ptah, and Seti. Komombo, one of the Greco-Roman temples, was devoted to 2 principles. The elder Horus, because there was Osiris had a brother, an older brother, that go back to the time before humanity was created. Okay, so Horus, the elder Horus. The younger Horus is the son of Isis and Osiris, but Osiris had an older brother. So Komombo is dedicated to the elder Horus and the crocodile god Sobek. So that's devoted to the Hatshepsut's temple Diribari was dedicated to Amun, but a number of other divinities were worshipped in that temple. For example, she had a smaller temple to Hathor, and she had a temple to Ra-Horakhti, and she had a temple to her father, Thutmose IV. All of the other New Kingdom temples were really dedicated to Amun as the principal king of the gods of that time. The triads. So we know that Karnak, the triad of Karnak would be Amun, Mut, and Khonsu. The triad of Memphis, which is to the north. Memphis is one of the earliest temples founded after Narmer unified the country at 3100 BC, and he built a temple to Ptah. So Ptah was the god resident at Memphis. So it would have been Ptah, Sekhmet, and their son Nefertum. Later on, by the time of the Greeks replaced Nefertum with Imhotep because he was such a powerful mind that people started to pray to him, and he became the god of medicine. Isis, in the myth of Osiris' body, it is said that Seth cut up Osiris' body into 13 pieces. Many people throughout the land claimed that Osiris was buried here, but different parts of his body was buried in different locations. So much so that his head was buried at Abydos, and his heart was buried at Philae, which is the temple of Isis. So the temple of Isis also had, in addition to Osiris, where something like the great Enod visited there, because they believe that not the brain but the heart is what really regulated everything. So you had something like 24 entities who would be visiting there. And also when you go in, there's three divinities who worship in the dromos, that is to say, the walkway up to the temple. So that takes care of that. Let's talk about the building of the temple, the orientation of the structure. Okay? So, again, I mentioned Theophilo Benga. He was Dr. Diop's research assistant. So he was quoting a French scholar who had done the work, and he tells us how, he explains what stretching the cord meant. Okay? Now, if we can envision, so we got these two poles here, if we had two other poles here, what would happen is that a site would be chosen to build this temple, and it's got to be sacralized, consecrated. So what the king would do, which is what happens in heaven, is theoretical. What happens on earth is practical. But based on what happens on earth, we postulate the theoretical to be factual. So in heaven, when the gods build the temple, they mark out the dimensions of the temple, first of all. It's called stretching the cord. Right? So the king uses, he with the queen, impersonating Horus and Thoth and Sishat. Thoth and Sishat, these were the divinities of mathematics and technology and things of this nature. They built the heavens, constructed the heavens, created the four poles that held up the heavens, and that kind of stuff. So the king takes out the surveyor's tool. You know, sometimes we see on the road, we see a surveyor looking to an object and marking off a spot. So he marks out the spot, the square, where the temple would be. He holds a plumb line with the queen, and they mark out the mathematical dimensions of the temple. A temple is not just built willy-nilly. A temple is built based on the heavenly bodies' location at a certain specific time. So they have to wait, generally, on the start of the new year to begin construction of the temple. So they're waiting until, let's say, Challenger gets to a specific spot, then they begin. He uses a time clock to measure, and then, as I said, he marked out the four quarters, and after this preparation is done, then he turns the building of the temple over to the architect. The architect is not any run-of-the-mill carpenter. He has to be, first of all, he has to be of the sacerdotal order, a priest of some high rank. And he has to be prepared psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and humanly. That is, he has to be pure. Remember I said in the beginning that I am pure, my motives pure, my hands are pure. So he got to be ready to build this thing. You know, when you're trying to, I'm not, a member of the church and this kind of stuff, but I know that there's more than an element of sacredness that takes place in these institutions. Right? And you have to be ready. You can't just, okay, for example, if there were in the temple itself, there was a permanent cadre of priests, and there were temporary cadres who would serve for like a 3-month period. right? And if you're going to serve in the temple, you can't be having sex the night before and then going over to the. You got to be pure. You got to prepare yourself so that when you walk in there, let everyone who enters be pure. That's what Dr. Ben used to say. Be careful what you do in the temple. Okay, and I was in Egypt with a fella in 2003 and this and that, and he had these disparaging things to say about me, and I said, okay, well, you don't talk like that in the temple. And I told him, and until I called him out on the bus, and his wife was upset. So you got to be careful when you're in there. You have to dress appropriately, you have to respect the culture, you have to respect the structure. You can't go into the sanctuary. Okay? So this guy got to be ready to begin the work of construction of this temple. After all this is done, the king turns the responsibility over to the builder. The builder was not just an architect, but someone high up in the sacerdotal order. Great architects such as Senmut, he built for Hatshepsut. Amenhotep, the son of Habu, he built for Amenhotep III. Right? Senmut was a priest. Among other things, he had 40. He was powerful man. We talk about President Biden as the most powerful man. This guy was the most powerful. In his time, he had 40 titles. He was in charge of the queen's bedroom. They said that they had a relationship going on, but he had more power than anything. So in order to be an architect of that standard, you had to be high up in the sacerdotal order. You had to be a priest of some great duration. Right? However, before construction could commence, a foundation ceremony had to be prepared. And it's interesting because in the building of the temple, there is a foundation ceremony that is performed, but also every addition to the temple creates a second and a third foundation ceremony. If you added a door, you have to have a foundation ceremony, a blessing of this particular portion of the temple, so that it will not be contaminated by malevolent forces. Okay, we talked about Luxor Temple that's built by Amenhotep III, and then Ramses II added the court. Well, Amenhotep III, he had a foundation ceremony for his temple. And when Ramses added to that, he created another foundation ceremony. Okay, so foundation ceremonies are just to tell you that these are the tools we're going to use. These are some evidence of the builder, his name or her name, and so forth. And the materials. First thing is that an animal is killed and its blood allowed to run to sanctify the spot. The name of the king or the queen, the cartouche or the shenu is placed in there. So you would know later on, we have this thing here today where they bury parts of the contemporary culture and they resurrect it 100 years from now and stuff. So all of this goes in there so that years later, whenever you get to that particular spot, you will know who built it. And it's interesting because there was a queen named Tasso. Her temple was razed. There was nothing left of it. But the foundation ceremony was under the ground, and they dug, and they found evidence of what was done and her name, so they were able to determine that this location she had built a temple. I mentioned that some temples are being built by a single person, some temples that is built by several people. Before we had talked about the tools and the materials that are used. With the foundation ceremony, many of the objects were inscribed with the founder's or the royal builder's name. In the heaps we find scraps, scarabs, plaques, markings of the offerings. The offerings, a leg of beef, or some other, the hair of a goat, or whatever. Models of the tools used in the construction. Excuse me. Models of the offerings. Legs of beef, corn, things of this nature. Metal objects made of thin sheet of copper. It includes the adze. An adze is one of these fancy, not an axe. It's a fancy type of an axe, a tool that is used generally. It has a more spiritual meaning. It is used in the ceremony of opening the mouth of the deceased, so that at the burial, the priest, generally in a lion skin, leopard skin outfit or whatever, he performs this ceremony called ceremony opening of the mouth, so that the deceased will be empowered to speak for himself when he goes to the judgment in the afterlife. So you have the adze, knives, you have axe heads, you have hoes, chisels, and tools of that nature. When it comes to the mortar, they didn't use mortar. When you look at, Dr. Ben always got a lot of mileage for talking about how in the Great Pyramids there was no mortar between the stones. Well, the size and the weight of the stone placed upon each other kept them in place. But generally, there were at least 3 types of man-made mortar. All right? So you had a white substance, principally of lime, that was put between the stone. Then lime mixture with sand. And then sometimes you pound the bricks and you put some lime in the bricks as well. The function of the king was to create a place for the God to reside. The function of the priest is to make sure that the temple is secure and the divine force is fed so that he will be happy and want to remain there. In the temple itself, so we have the king who builds the temple and the priest who manages the temple, or the priesthood, okay, manages the temple. Now, in the temple itself, you have 3 levels of entities that function. So you have the high order of the priesthood, your bishops and your popes and what have you, and you have the low order. So you have the high order, the low order, and you have the auxiliaries. And what we mean by auxiliaries is the people who move things around, keep things moving. Right? The top guy, the king, is the high priest of the religion. But the king cannot be in every temple. So he appoints a high priest to each temple. Right? And that person regularly. There's an overall high priest over the whole country. And then there's a high priest for each specific temple. And so you have the high order and low order, and the auxiliaries. Let me give you an example. During the reign of Ramses III of the 20th dynasty, right? At that time, Amun-Ra was the principal god. There were others that would worship Ptah, Thoth, and so forth. Under Ramses III, and he ruled from 1198 to 1166 BC. A papyrus gives the total number of men in Amun's service, priests as well as peasants, administrators, diverse workers, a total of 81,322 people working for this main god, right? And we learn from the same document that this privileged god had at his command 433 gardens, 924 square miles of fields, 83 boats, 46 construction yards, 65 small market towns, exclusively devoted to the upkeep of the holy domain. Seeing these figures, one understands the exceptional importance of the personnel of Amun, and one can easily imagine the astonishing quantity of priests and men of every function who might be attached to the cult and to the material administration of such an organism. Up to 125 diverse functions can be counted among the personnel in service of that particular divinity. So you need, it's called like a social system that's designed to keep the god happy and to maintain his wealth. You know, when invaders come in, first thing they do is they attack your temple, because the wealth of the state is generally housed in the temple. So not only they destroy the temple, but they raise it and they take away whatever gold, diamonds, and whatever you can find. It's been said that when Champollion deciphered the hieroglyphs in 1822, that he had gotten help from a priest who had been on the ground for something like 40 years without coming up above because he was studying. Out of urban, and that goes to show you, and it's a indication that young people must understand that in order to get to the top, sometimes you gotta study forever. When your friends are right there in the ballpark or wherever, you gotta be grinding those books. It's interesting. I was in a printing place today, and this young man came in there and he wanted to mail a box. So you have to take the box out, and what was in the box? A pair of sneakers. And I said, how much you pay for that? He said, I bought it on eBay for $600. Yeah, but I'm selling it now for $400. When I use it, $600. I can't even get it in my boat. I gotta go to Egypt. I gotta write a book, go to Egypt, get all the information I need to go. And I said, can you give me a free book? I mean, but he would spend $600. Anyway, so here is an individual. The career of such a prince of the church. He uses church. He's Adolf Ehrman in the book called Egyptian Religion. He explains by way of analogy, and he says he uses the word church, which does not apply to Egypt. It applies to Europe and Christianity. But we must understand that, and I've said this before, that, and I've encountered this in Harlem. Some people say, don't read the white man. It's not about reading the white man. The white man did the work of reclaiming the temples from. You have to learn how to read the white man. You have to be critical. You have to be analytic in your understanding. Because what he says, we are writing for European audience. Okay? We're writing for European audience. And he would twist this and twist that in terms of who did the work and all that. But he's still telling them what's right. So you got to read between the lines, above the lines, on the side of the lines, below the lines. You got to read all over the lines to get the true meaning. So he said, the career of such a prince of the church is described to us by one of them. His name was Becken Council, a contemporary of Ramses II. And this illustration is on the Munich stele. He was he said, at first he was destined for the office of a priest up to his 15th year. He was sort of born in you see, a father, most of the peasants, what a peasant wanted most of all is that his son don't follow in his footsteps, being out in the sun, in the mud, farming and what have you. So he looked for one of his sons that had some inclination of intellect and hoped that he would get a job that, that would take him away from the farm, so to speak. He always said, look, son, I've never seen a goldsmith on important duty. I've seen a scribe that all he does, he goes to work with this. His tools is up here. So this young man is put in the temple at a very early age, and at 15 years old, he's promoted. He was promoted as overseer of the staples the stables of the king. He then entered as a wab, which is a low priest. The wabs are the ones who inspect the animals that are going to be sacrificed. I remained 4 years in this lowest of ranks. So he goes in at he's recognized at 15 years old. And then he spent 4 years in that rank. He then had to serve 12 years. So 15 and 4, 19, and 12 is 31. As he's titled Divine Father. Then he served 15 years. That makes him 46. And 12 years, 58. He was then in his 59th year when the God made him an accompaniment of amazing excellence, the high priest of Amun. An office he was destined to fill for 26 years. So 59 and 26 is 85. He probably died at 85. We don't have any more information. But that is what I call commitment to service. Okay? Okay. So, and so forth. So, we see these truly holy men that devote themselves. They believe. Today someone will say, well, you know, they believed in what they preached. And they lived it. Amen. And they lived it because they wanted to be judged fairly in the next life.
That's right.
Well, so, okay, let's talk decoration of the temple. Alright? Okay, on the exterior walls of the temple, you would see the king battling the enemies of the temple. The enemies of the temple is not only the nations of next door, but the spiritual forces that bring in ill feelings into the divine space. The interior walls describe the king in adoration of the gods. He's incensing the gods. He's leading a procession to the gods. He's carrying the gods' bark and what have you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, while all the temples depict ritual scenes on walls and individual images, thank you, sir, on columns, in Greco-Roman temples, you not only have the images, you also have the illustration. Some temples had astronomical scenes on the ceiling. It's interesting because commoner and nobility seldom interact. We had mentioned Senmut, who was the architect of Queen Hatshepsut, who built her temple. He built a temple at a place called Drab Abu el Naga, in which he sculptured the faces of his parents on the side of a mountain, which became the Rushmore phenomenon. Okay, when I started by saying that they don't want you, the oppressor doesn't want you to, he wants to suppress your historic memory. The Washington Monument is a constructed piece of edifice. It is supposed to look like an obelisk. The obelisk is a single piece of stone quarried and shipped from the place of quarry to the place of construction, generally along the river.
It's a Tekken.
Tekken. Tekken is one in Central Park. Tekken is the name. The Washington Monument is a put together stone and cement piece, but they wouldn't tell you that Mount Rushmore was created by this African named Senmut, or that the forerunner to the Washington Monument was the Tekken, or obelisk as we call it. So he not only built the Queen's Temple, Isis, in the beginning, Isis wanted to trick Ra to find out what was his name. The name is the most important thing. If you don't have a name, you don't exist. You know. So what she did, she was a magician, and she had these 7 scorpions, and she attacked him, and they bit him, and he lay dying, and she said to him, "If you tell me a name, I will heal you." So he said, "Come, come, come," and he whispered his name in her ear, and she used her powers to withdraw the poison from that the scorpions had. It's interesting. I showed you some of my earlier work with the plan of the temple, among others. But my name, my African name, is here. I had it published back in '97, right? Because I got my name in Karnak Temple, and I was baptized in Luxor Temple. And I offered myself up in Isis Temple. But Salvador said, "What are you doing, man?" I asked out the bed. He said, "Can't do it." Okay. My African name. Said what meant to Hote.
What does that mean?
Sedmont was Hatshepsut's lover, her architect, and he built his temple next to this other king. So it's king and an architect. You can add lover and so forth. But Abdul gave me that. Okay, so the Hypostyle, the ritual is depicted as well as being a place where the procession gathers. The procession gathers either to go in further into the space where the god is, or to leave the temple for one of several festivals that are generally held. So we have the Opet festival, which is held at Luxor Temple. The Feast of the Valley, where the god crosses the river and visits the temples, the mortuary temples of the various kings, and the Festival of Men. The Festival of Men is dedicated to the coronation of the king. So, but there are a whole slew of festivals that were being held, right? There are 2 sets of orders of columns. You have the peristyle and the hypostyle. The peristyle is in an open court. Sometimes there are 2 of them. Sometimes there's 1 row, and there is it's called an ambulatory, where you could walk around and it has a covering. Most of them don't have a covering. There's a covering at Edfu, there's a covering at Feeling. And the hypostyle is the hall with the roof, where the procession gathers and stuff like that. The columns, whether they're in the peristyle or in the hypostyle, the idea of column emerged out of the need for, first as a pillar, because when quarrying into the mountain and you're digging out the stone, you were fearful that the open space would collapse, the roof of the open space would collapse. So you wanted to maintain a pillar to support the roof. But outside of this area, whenever a pole was needed, they used a plant or a tree. So the earliest columns represented the plant motif. So you had the palm plant, or the lotus plant, or the papyrus. But there's also, in a much later period, what came to be called the composite, where a number of concepts were included into this support because generally then the column supported a roof of some sort. A roof outside where you have an architrave running between this, there's a space between these two poles, and you have a piece of stone running across called an architrave, and it's centered on this pole, it's centered on that pole, and you're able to bridge a distance. So the composite column, we know that there's a Doric, the Ionic, and the composite. The composite is a much later thing, but it had, like, for example, Edfu and Philae, each column had a different top or a capital. So it becomes more complex, right? So you have, you also have what is called the Hathor column. That is a column, a regular column with the head of the goddess Hathor as the capital on top. And then you have what is called the Osiris pillar. So you have a stone, a stone pillar, and you had a statue of the god Osiris juxtaposed to the pillar, and it's called the Osiris pillar or the Osiris feature.
The tent.
And of course, there is what is called the 10th pole column. Pay attention to it. The 10th pole column was used only one time among surviving evidence. And it is found in the festival temple of Thutmose III, in the rear of Karnak temple, beyond the sanctuary and the Middle Kingdom court. He built what is called the Akmenu, the festival temple. I'm jumping. Okay, let's talk sex. Not in the carnal sense. Okay. But not in the carnal sense. I must realize in these times religion is politics. Okay? Even today it still is. It's been recognized that the gods had a tremendous sexual appetite. To justify her rule, Hatshepsut said that Thutmose is not my father. My father was the god Amun, right? And he visited my mother in a flash of light and perfume. And in her temple, she has an image of the mother, not only with the baby bump, but the mother sitting on a couch and smiling as if, you know, in the carnal sense, after you had a satisfactory experience, how terrific you may feel. So the architect, the sculptor of our time was able to create an image of this lady pleased, having been visited by God. At Luxor Temple was also, the purpose of Luxor Temple was to celebrate the Opet Festival. And the Opet Festival is where Amun and his wife moved, were in Kuch for a 24-day period. And the country went wild in all forms of appetites, if you will. That same temple, Amenhotep III, who built the temple, he used the same strategy that Hatshepsut used to say that his father came down too. If you go to Osiris' temple at Abydos, you will see the image after his brother Seth had killed him. Isis appealed to Ra, who sent Thoth and Anubis to help Isis locate Osiris and bring him back to life. And there is an image of him laying prone on a bier with an erection, and the goddess laying on top of him to be impregnated with her son Horus, who, when he grew to manhood, went after the uncle and killed the uncle because he had killed his father. There is a name of Amun in an evolutionary process called Kamute. And you find many of the kings would say that he's the bull of his mother. That's the quote, the bull of his mother. And finally, the same Akmenu, which I started with before I mentioned this word, John Anthony West, who was a student of Schwaller de Lubis, he said that this inverted column that you found nowhere else in Egypt was not really a tent pole. So, you know, the army on the march, they set up a tent or what have you for the night. It wasn't really a tent pole, but it's actually the head of a penis. All right, so when I say, you know, I didn't mean, like I said, not in the carnal sense, okay? So, okay, so this brings me to the ritual in the temple. Here's what happens. I had mentioned before that what happens up there is theoretical. What happens down here is practical. But we use the analogy of what happens down here to postulate what happens up there. So that when they tell you the ritual is here, is what happens up there. In all of this, I'm jumping ahead of myself too, because the ritual is practiced 3 times per day. In the morning, at noon, and then you put the God to bed at night with a light dinner. I've often wondered, we know that he is fed at noon down here. But when he's traveling across the sky, does he stop for lunch? You gotta figure that out. Or that he gets 2 for 1. That the metaphysical nature of the ritual at lunchtime is so powerful that it transposes itself from here to there, so that the God is fed up there while we're feeding him down here. That is, I don't know, it's an original idea, but I haven't found anyone who would dispute it or clarify it. So, anyway, the ritual, the same ritual for the most part happens when in the baptism, when the young king is born, he's baptized. He is destined to be king. So he's baptized because he's going to be, when he gets 18 or whatever, he's going to sit on the throne. When he's about to be coronated, he's baptized. When he dies and he's taken to be mummified, he's baptized again. Then when he is about to be buried, at the door of the tomb, where the priest conducts the opening of the mouth ceremony, he's again baptized. And then he's sent on his way to arrive at the hall of African judgment to be judged by Osiris, king of the dead. Along the way, he's baptized by the tree goddess, who pours 4 pitchers of water on him as he transiting the desert area. When he gets to the door of heaven, you can't come in, buddy, you got to be baptized. And then once he gets in there, now he's weighed in the balance, and he's found to be justified through a voice. Then now Horus will take him to Osiris, enthroned besides his 2 sisters, Isis and Nephthys. And then he's sprinkled with incense and so forth. And then now he can approach the God. So the same ceremony follows him throughout. Okay. Now, the temple can be compared with a domestic structure. Okay? Let's say, for example, this is my house. You are coming to see me, and you arrive at my gate, my fence. The fence is open, you move, you come into my yard, up to my door. So the yard brings you to my door. I open my door and you come into my residence, into my living room. Beyond my living room is my bedroom. So now I have the gate, I have my yard, 2, I have my living room, 3, and I have my bedroom. Only my family can go in. You can come into my living room, or you can't go into my bedroom. 4 parts. It's the same thing with the temple. So you have what brings you to the temple could be a canal that entrances into an avenue of sphinxes up to the pylon. And you enter into the pylon. The pylon is the entrance into the temple where there's a court. The court, which is the second part, the court brings you to the hypostyle hall. We have mentioned that the hypostyle hall is where the procession gathers, either to go out or go in. And beyond the hypostyle hall is a place called the wajit, which is the entrance to the sanctuary. And then the sanctuary is where the God is concealed, and only a few people will go in there. So now, we had mentioned about the king temple and the worship temple. So, for example, let's take not a big temple. Let's take a smaller temple. Whether it's Denver or Edfu, take Edfu. So, but I have to give you an introduction to that. Okay. We talk about the worship temple and the mortuary temple, the God temple and the king temple. Okay. Medinat Habu is a temple built by Ramses III of the 20th dynasty. It is a history of the wars that he fought. And you can see it all around the temple. Each of these king temples had an adjacent palace. When the king came to the temple, he had to have a place to stay. So there was a temple adjacent. This temple is the only place where there is illustrated evidence of the king going to the temple. Just as I tried to compare the domestic structure with the temple, in the domestic structure, the king is the master of that home, is awoken by his servants. He is led to his, what we would call the bathroom today, the prayer duet, where he gets his bath and all of the accoutrements that his manservant provides. You know, you towel him, you powder him, you this, that, you dress him. Then you put on his jewelry. Then you set him out a table for him to dine. And after he's ready, you set him out. Say, well, go ahead and do your work. So the king now goes through the same process, and he arrives at the temple's door. Okay, he's washed over there, but he's still got to be washed here. So he has to be baptized before he could. So we have that Medinat Habu, evidence of the king leaving the palace to enter the temple where he's going to be baptized. And now he's baptized and he's going to walk through the entrance spiral of the temple. Right. In this case, we use the smaller temples like Edfu or Denver. Now, once he is ready to go in, the temple now has to be baptized. You see, when the God is put to sleep at night, everything shuts down. There's a guy in a book called Secret something like that. He wanted to spend the night in the Great Pyramid. He was a mystic. And he appealed to the authorities in Cairo. And they said, man, you crazy what? Why you want to go in there? We lock up everything and we go home at night. He said, I wanted to stay the night in the pyramid, but he had his own reasons. And while he was in there, according to his book, A Walk in Secret Egypt, he said that there were people in there, spiritual forces. And the message that they gave him was, like Mulana Kurengba said, it's called Kwanzaa guy, bring good into the world. That's what your function is, to bring good into the world. Not to be angry. Remember where you get my saying that when the student is ready, the master will appear. When the learner's attitude is hostile, no instruction can proceed. You have to be pure. My mouth is pure, my hands are pure. So this is what he said. So now the temple is locked down, so they have to wake up the temple. Now the priest goes into the temple with the king and start incensing the whole place. He has to go to every room in the temple, every statue. And when he does all of this, everybody is now awake. And then now, the ritual can be proceeded. You can proceed in the ritual. So what do we have? What do we have? Okay, let me see what I got, because I wanted to be clear about this, the ritual in the temple. So what I have is going to the temple, the baptism, entry into the temple, and then the procession that heads towards the sanctuary. Now, the procession itself heading into the sanctuary could be 2-3 dozen people. Why? Because everybody's doing something. Right? You got people carrying water, people carrying food, people carrying beverages, people carrying flowers, people carrying incense, people carrying musicians. There are musical instruments, people singing, choral singers, people playing musical instruments, people reading the holy book that dictates what the ritual should be. So it's a big procession. But as you go in, past, most of them stop in the Hypostat Hall, and fewer head towards the sanctuary. Once they arrive at the sanctuary, only the king and the high priest can enter this most holiest place. This is the most significant place in the temple.
Holy of Holies.
Pardon?
Holy of Holies?
Yes, the Holy of Holies. Right? The Holy of Holies, of course, is built on the highest level in the temple. When you go into the temple, the temple rises. It can rise through a series of steps that move you from one plane to the next plane to the next plane, and the Holy of Holies is the highest spot over there. And equally too, the ceiling descends so that you have this kind of a schema as you go inward. So here's what happens in the temple, in the sanctuary. Let me read this for you, because this is the most important part of the whole lecture, and today we were supposed to deal with the ritual in the sanctuary. So the sanctuary is naturally a dark place because the God remains in the heavens are dark. Sometimes there's a hole in the ceiling where a ray of light comes in. Most sanctuaries have one door. Karnak has 2 doors. Karnak is what you would call an open sanctuary. Practically every other temple has one door. Karnak, because it sits on the east-west axis, it allows the eastern door allows the ray of the sun as it rises on the horizon to penetrate into the structure and bathe the God's image that rests on the altar. And at the end of the day, after he has risen across the heavens, the last rays of the sun can shine back into the temple. All of this here, he's moved around so that he can get the last rays. And it's interesting because the pylon is a gate. Karnak in itself has 10 pylons. There are 6 pylons on the north-south, on the east-west axis, and there are 4 pylons on the north-south axis. The 6 pylons, the great pylon, which is today number 1, and that's again one of the contradictions because it was not the first pylon to be built. But it's the largest pylon with the largest opening. And as you descend as you enter on that east-west axis, the pylon openings become smaller so that light is controlled in the throwback to the sanctuary at the end of the day. So the king opens the door. It is called opening the door. This is the most crucial part of the whole lecture, I would imagine. He is now at the door. The entourage is back there. You can hear some of the ladies singing, and the instrumental musicians are playing and what have you. And a few people bring some of the things used in the sanctuary to the door, but he's the one that opens the door, and opens the door with the high priest. And the first thing that is done by the high priest, he strikes or rubs 2 pieces of wood like that, and that generates a spark, or maybe a piece of flint, or 2 stones or whatever, and create a spark that allows a flame to be lit. The flame was regarded as divine effluence, the eye of the sun god Horus. It furnished a means of lighting the temple and of kindling the fire for the burnt offering. The latter was the main object of now what takes place. So he takes hold of the incense, the censer. The censer is the mechanism in which the bowl containing the incense and the flame is placed. There were 2. One was like a hand. There, I saw some of this in Paris, at the Paris Museum in Paris. And the other one is like a floor incenser that is placed. Incense is never burnt on the altar. Incense is burnt in the corner or in the hand of the priest. You see, in Christian church experience, we see the priest with an instrument, with a chain, with a bowl, and you put the incense in there and you light it, and you see he does this. So, in this time here now, as the priest and the king enter, the priest now begins doing that to create the smoke for of the incense. And then he moves to create another fire in a incenser that is placed in a corner. The incenser is important. Why? Okay, so we date Egyptian civilization or dynastic rule at about 3200. Most people earlier said 3200. Then they said 3100, 3000. Right now, I think they're condensing it. They're saying, oh, it started at 950. Some have argued the long chronology and the short chronology. Short chronology is to be contemporary with what was happening in Southwest Asia, Mesopotamia, Iraq, in that area. The long chronology can go back to 4100. Flinders Petrie says 5701. Milano Corella says 6200. Now, can you imagine that these people lost 3,000 years of the history to start the first dynasty at 3100 instead of 6200? Ivan Van Sertima spent a lot of time with the discovery of the world's earliest monarchy found at a place called Tassetu, a kingdom at a place called Kustal, where the kingdom of Tasseti was located.
Right.
And this was published in New York Times, March 1, 1979, front page, world's earliest monarchy found in Nubia. And among the things that they found in this tomb that out of the University of Chicago, and why Dr. Jacob Carell stands out, he is from Chicago. And the other guy over there that does the publishing, they challenge the misinformation of the University of Chicago. Keith Sell, he co-authored the book called When Egypt Ruled the East. When Egypt built under the British in 1902, they built the lower dam. And in 1961, they built, under President Nasser, they built the high dam that created what is called Lake Nasser. And Lake Nasser ended up submerging a lot of the Nubian cultural history. So the temple of Abu Simbel was moved in this maneuver to a higher area because it was an important temple of Ramses II. It was well intact, and they moved it to higher ground. Okay? When they were contemplating building the dam, UNESCO issued an order, a call to nations that had been in Egypt, that had been involved in archaeological excavation, to send teams to rescue the Nubian culture. University of Chicago sent Keith Sell, and Ivan Van Sertima said that Sell discovered an important fact that he hoped to carry to his grave. The evidence was deposited in the basement of the University of Chicago. A young scholar doing what I call mining the basement. He discovered evidence of the kingdom of Tasseti, where what was found was a pharaoh enthroned wearing the white crown. A palace facade, the entrance to a palace like a gate, and evidence of the bird, the Horus bird, and an incenser, same as the one that you see in the corner that is lit to incense the room while the king and the high priest are there to conduct the ritual. So he takes all the incense, the one in hand, placing the incense container in the incense, and saw the flame going. Thereupon the minister advances to the elevated place. So now the floor of the sanctuary is covered in sand. The nails where the God image is on a higher elevated plane. So he has to now climb up. So there are two levels in the sanctuary. He has to climb up, just as he opened the door to enter, or opening the doors of heaven, he has to open the door of what is called the naos. That is to say, the little house in which the God's image rests. He opens the door, and he looks upon the God. And he is discombobulated because You are looking at pure. You remember in one of the most shown movies, but one of the most factually false movies, the Ten Commandments. When Moses went up to the high ground and God appeared, he said, "Don't look at me." He couldn't look on him because he's so powerful. So the priest goes in there now and looks upon his God. And he bends down, and then it's about 4 by 6 times. You know, my Lord, I can't even look on you. You're so powerful. And his man's behind him, and they're going through all the ritual incense aspersion, as it's called. So, as I said, he opens the door, he breaks the seal and opens the door and looks upon the God. Now, he has to say to the God, after he's done all these gyrations, he has to say, "Your Majesty, can I put my hands on you?" He can't just go in there and grab the divine force. He has to ask permission. Because he has to take him out, he has to bathe him, he has to dress him, he has to put on his jewelry, he has to feed him, and all. So he's now in contact with the man, the force that he worships. Okay? And then he does what he has to do. So he loosened the bands that fastened the door, he broke the seal, he opened the nails, he made the face of the God himself visible, and then he looked upon the God. He cast himself on the ground, he raised himself, and he repeated the prostration several times, keeping his face all the way towards the earth, and then commenced the hymn and praise of the God. So he's singing, the high priest is singing, and the high priest is doing, and then you got music in the background and all that. When this was ended, a series of offerings were presented to the God. First of all, a mixture of oil and honey, which is customary to anoint the image of the God. So you have to put oil and honey on the God, you know, and all this before we get all this stuff that's going on today. And then you incense in all the water. And then the priest stepped back from the nails into the adjoining room of the temple, where he started saying a short prayer, and then they're praying and what have you. Then he comes back into the front of the nails, and he starts praying again. Then he steps up. Then he finds himself on the same level as God. They're both on the same level. Then he keeps doing this. Then he presents the image of the God, the goddess Mount, which is oftentimes a representation of his name. So he's saying to the God, "I am true. My name. I am true. I am pure. I respect you." All of that goes with it. Then he purified the God, the deity, with 4 libation pitchers of water. Remember that 4 libation pitchers? I told you that when they were crossing after the ceremony at the tomb's entrance, and he's crossing towards the hall of judgment, the tree goddess pours 4. This whole notion of 4 is powerful. I was writing something about it. The four pillars of heaven, the 4 cows that the king leads to the God, the four doors, 4. So he takes 4 pitchers full of water and he pours it onto the God. Then he put on his clothing, green, red, and a dark white sash. Then he uses 2 types of ointment to anoint the God. And then he places black eye paint on it, paints him, I had discovered a piece of evidence sometime on the science, and it said that in ancient times, he-men wore curls. You know this whole stupidity of today that as a He-Man, of course, you know, He-Man used to say, give me a double scotch, give me a double scotch on the rocks. Today they're saying, can I have a water? You know, I mean. So, in those times, He-Man painted their faces. They had curls in their hair, because they had long hair and what have you. So after he had done painting the face of the God, his man continues to fumigate the place because after a while, you don't want malevolent forces to enter the doorway and contaminate that sacred space. Then he gets 4 grains of salt and he feeds it to the God to clean out the God. I mean, today we use I'm coming there. We use the mouthwash. So he gives the God these 4 grains of salt to cleanse the mouth and so forth. They continue to fumigate the place with different types of incense and salts and what have you. And that brings us, in essence, to the conclusion of the ritual. Then there is what I call the strategic retreat. Now he has to get out of there, but he don't just run out. First of all, he has to place the God back in the nails, close the nails, put a seal on. And then now he has to retreat out of the outer door. Now, the nail stands in a room with a passage all around it, and there's sand on the floor. And in the ritual, he has to go around the nails 4 times, so his footprints are in sand. And he now has to remove his footprints, and he uses the branch of a tree. It's called a hidden tree. Hidden, hidden tree. So he uses the branch and he removes his footprints, and all the while he's not backing the God, he's facing the God as he moves backward. The only evidence I've seen of this is in Karnak, in the northwestern high elevation of the north wall, and you see him pulling the thing like that so that he can exit the sanctuary and leave the sun unruffled. And of course they're praying as they're back out. Then he seals the door, and whatever food that was left at the table that they had to, after dressing, giving the food or whatever, all of that stuff is removed. And then the entourage that had remained in the back comes in, collects this, and then it's going to be dispersed among them. And God is put to bed until the next disturbance, if you will. So, what I said there about what happens in the sanctuary happens in the morning, at noon, and in the evening. In the morning, he's given a heavy breakfast, medium-sized breakfast, and a light snack, and then he's put to bed. And then the whole thing is closed up. If it's a large temple, there's still people around, but a certain area is blocked off. If it's a smaller temple, then the gates and the outer thing is closed, and then you come back at evening time. You come back next morning, and then you have to reawaken the temple because the temple goes to sleep. And this is how this happens, and this is what the whole idea of today's lecture is. I want to end by saying 2 things. First of all, I didn't point out to you that the Akmenu, the festival temple of Thutmose III, he was a great conqueror, one of the greatest. It goes to show you how our history is warped. This man is called the Napoleon of far antiquity. They don't call him Napoleon the Tutmosis of modern times, but they describe him as the Napoleon of far antiquity. Just like how Sekou Touré, his father, is called the Black Napoleon of the Sudan. Everything is done in analogy with European history. That's why the man said, we are writing for European audience. We can follow them, but we need to be circumspect in evaluating the evidence, extract what we find is useful, and condemn or criticize what we think is false. And that's how we're going to be able to preserve our integrity as African people. So I want to begin ending my lecture by saying, according to Theophile Benga in African philosophy, the Pharaonic period, he says, one Egyptologist sums up this reality concisely. Egyptian society embraces the entire universe. All elements and beings are registered participants, like parts of a single whole, collaboration in a single enterprise. What he means is that in ancient Egypt, however, the human being was precisely God, human God, a seamless whole, in effect. That a philosophy of wholeness should take form in the Pharaonic polis was altogether natural. For a Pharaonic society was a grand, organized, universal ensemble embracing the elements: sky, sun, moon, stars, fire, water, earth, vegetation, beings, gods, goddesses, spirits, kings and queens, viziers, the royal family, administrators of various central, provincial, and local government departments, treasury, justice, army, temples, scribes and sundry craft persons, carpenters, engravers, smelters, cobblers, together with peasants and herders, and the assembly held for nearly 25 centuries of national history. In this system, nothing was completely independent, isolated from the overall Pharaonic domain. The sacred and the profane were merely two aspects of a single socio-political reality incarnated by the Pharaoh, the god king. Given the principal function of the temple was to provide a safe and secure home for the god to be comfortable, prayers and ritual was unending because of continuous threats from Egypt's enemies, foreign, domestic, and malevolent. The laws of opposites operated wherever in Egypt, night and day, desert and reality, good and evil, or Mart and Isfit, rich plain and the dreaded desert. The desert is a region of malevolent spirits, strange monsters of blinding, suffocating storms, or parching thirst and heat. These represent the spiritual forces needed to contend with such evil. And therefore, we must recognize forces of oppression in whatever form. Stay vigilant. Stay true. Man, know thyself. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, give Dr. Monderson a great big hand. Okay, our first question would be from the audience. Q&A. Question from the audience, Q&A.
Yeah, Osiris speaking. To the doctor. At the point of the priest and the pharaoh coming before the god, the Neter, depending on the Neter, the god that you're dealing with in the heavens, because you know, you said the practical is here. In the heaven and the celestial was actually there. My understanding is that it corresponds to not only the solar aspect, but the stellar constellations. So whereby you may get a lunar or stellar aspect at some time from here to there. You get lunar and stellar. At other times, it's the constellational plates that are corresponding to the Lord. These different aspects that you're pointing out, what would be the operative energy on this plane based on the different constellations or astral bodies?
Well, let me first say that I'm a historian, and I know very little about the metaphysical aspects of divine and human interaction. Right? I do know that the priest, you remember how I showed you how many years this guy stayed in the temple?
Right.
He was not just twiddling his thumbs.
59.
He was learning how to communicate with these divine forces. Okay? Now, you have to be very good at what you do to encourage the divine force to come to earth and remain here. Okay? Now, there were 5 principal forces at work. Okay? So like we have Ra at Heliopolis, where he was worshipped. Ptah at Memphis. Okay? Thoth at I've been there. Amunata at Karnak, and Khanum at Aswan, Elephantine, and also at Esna. Right? Dr. Carruthers remind us that this is not, they may have different names, but it's not 5 competing entities we're dealing with. It's the same entity seen from different lenses. But, so all you needed to do is to bring one God force down. Okay? And if you make the environment sufficiently conducive, he will remain there and do what he's supposed to do. Now, you got to go into the astronomy. I do know that all temples were oriented towards a heavenly body because they believed that a particular force existed in that body. If you go to, there is the Temple of Dendera, right? There's a kiosk of the goddess Nut that spans the heavens, right? Her 2 feet over here, her 2 arms are over there. And her body represents the ark of heaven. And she gives birth to the sun in the morning, and then he travels across the heavens and she swallows him at night. And that swallowing represents his journey under the earth to arrive on the morning of in the east. In that temple, in that kiosk, there is also an image of her shining down on the temple of Dendera. Dendera is Hatu's temple. Right? Hatu's temple, Nut is in there. So the God itself is bringing the force onto the temple. How the priests are able to maintain that interaction, very hardly anyone knows. We don't know that, because certain things you don't tell. I mean, as I tell my son and my daughters or whatever, you don't tell your friends that your mother puts the key under the mark in front of the door. So there's a lot of stuff that we will never know, as no matter how skilled we are in understanding the culture. I'm trying to say that your question is A1. Very few can give you a true answer. I certainly can't go beyond this.
All right, so, anybody from the Zoom audience have a question for the doctor? Zoom audience? Anybody from the Zoom question? Okay, question for the floor.
With respect to Tutmos III, because he's not discussed a lot, especially with respect to his military prowess. Whether you're talking about Hannibal, Shaka Zulu, how would you rate Tutmos III in terms of his military strategies over the span of ages? Because he never lost a military campaign. Never. Consequently, would you say he's the greatest military leader?
Well, he's been addressed as the greatest conqueror. He was a strategist. He gained fame by taking a chance in leading an army through a passage that, first of all, was too narrow for an army to transit, right? And he caught his adversaries unaware because of what he did. But like you said, after he had deposed, or she died, to Hatshepsut, some say his aunt, some say his sister, his mother, whatever.
Right.
And it's interesting because he is credited with reigning for 54 years, but what he did was he added her 20 years to his 34 years of rule, right? But he waged 18 campaigns against the princes of Southwest Asia. And Dr. Diab likes to talk about how they praise him. We will leave the dirt in front of you. They bow down, and another thing too is that we hear a lot about these Asiatic princesses coming to Egypt. They were part of the harem. They were, it's in a joke, but we don't get that. It's just like I was saying in the beginning, but how the Tekken and the Washaman men, they try to suppress our history by giving us their version. So we have to. I remember when I was at Temple, they didn't like me over there. It was my fault. I should have gotten a doctorate from Temple. Hey, listen. Anyway, what I should have done is I should get Sonny to get over there and tell him what the hell you're doing. Why y'all treating mothers like that? Anyway, the guy said, it's a case of the student no more than the professor. Right? But he was able to not just win military battles, he was a great builder. Yeah. Okay? He built, he had a temple at Deir el-Bahari, we mentioned Mentuhotep's temple and Hatshepsut's temple, and he built a temple right above that. He built his festival temple beyond the sanctuary and the kingdom court. And in there, I wanted to say to you that temple, there was another temple behind that one where the priests were instructed on how to do the ritual. You see what we just read through there? That's where they trained them. And beyond that, there was another temple called the temple, Ramses II built that, called the Temple of the Hearing Aid. And beyond that was a kiosk of Taharqa Taharka is another military genius that don't get credit.
Right.
Right? Taharka went to Egypt at 20 years old. Right? 20 years old. He was put in charge of the entire Egyptian army to fight Sennacherib, the Assyrian general who had come into Egypt. 20 years old. Right? He was put in charge of the Egyptian and Nubian forces, Ethiopian forces at 20. Right? So he built 4 kiosks at Karnak Temple. The one at the front, that one beyond the Temple of the Hearing Aid, one over by Mantu, and one towards Mount Temple. Tutmosis, there was a kind of a mean streak about him because his people destroyed Hatshepsut's temple because they're saying that she kept him from ruling. Right? I just remember when I told you when we talked about sex, but how Hatshepsut said that the God visited her mother in a light, in a flash of light and perfume. Now, not the hypostatic wall that we are familiar with, but an early one, because the one that we are familiar with, the big one, that's 19th dynasty. The 18th dynasty, where his father, Tutmosis I, had built it. Here's how he argues his right to rule. He said, I'm standing in the procession in the hypostatic hall, and the God is making the rounds. And he sees me. And he stops. I say, come here. I want you to be. I mean, who's going to question such a theory? I mean, it's so original that, if the king says so, it's so. Sparrow says so, it's so. So, he built tremendously. He repaired a lot of temples and what have you. But the main thing, and not only that, he brought back, Hatshepsut gets credit for sending an expedition to Punt. Punt is the famous home origin of the Egyptians that they tried to tell us, well, it was in Saudi Arabia. It wasn't in Saudi, it was Central Africa. Right? She sent an expedition that brought back all these exotic animals and plants. So it's been said that this is the first botanical study of an alien culture where she brought plants and planted it in front of her temple. Right now there are 2 plant holes with the identification that this is where she planted these trees. But she planted incense trees. You remember I told you that she had these, when we were talking about the sacred lake, that she had these ponds of milk so that when the God was traversing her garden, his garden, he could drink from the water that she had created. Well, there were incense trees planted, and she's been credited with the first study of an alien culture transited into another culture. Well, when he came out of Southwest Asia, he brought, behind that same temple, there was what is called the botanical garden, right? That he brought evidence of plants that were from Southwest Asia and animals. And you can go see it right now, it's called the botanical garden. So he did a lot of stuff, except for the thing that he said that he didn't like the woman and his people attacked her temple. Sedgwood, who was her architect, he built a temple, he built a tomb in her temple. Right? And he was wise enough to realize that when the queen fell, they will come after him. So he decorated his temple walls, and then he put plaster over it. And then he decorated it again. So when the adversaries discovered his tomb, and they defaced the illustrations, the decoration, say, okay, we got you. But guess what? With time, the plaster fell off. And you see that he actually anticipated their actions. So he decorated his wall 2 times. Well, it's the same way that Tutmosis decorated his temple in the back with the alien plants and animals and things of this nature. So he did. He erected the tallest obelisk that is now in. Is it Istanbul? The tallest. His obelisk was 107 feet tall. Hatshepsut's standard obelisk today is 95 feet tall, 300 tons of stone. Right? His is bigger than that. Now they carry it away, and it's in Europe. Like, it's up here. I can't remember wherever. The Lateran. I think it's in Italy, right? So you know, he did a lot of stuff. But like you said, there's a book on him. There's a book on him. I know something to him and Hatshepsut as builders, you know, but he's multifaceted as a pharaoh, and because of his military powers, he's considered the greatest pharaoh of all Egypt. So that sort of like addresses some of what applies to your question. Yes, sir.
When you were saying all the people involved in building these different temples, what kind of economic system was in place then?
You know, I was in Detroit and this guy asked me if I can do a paper on temple economics, you know. But okay, so the king builds a temple and endows the temple. So he gives them seed money. And then the temple now has to make this $10 gift worth 10 to 100. So how do they organize this, right? Well, the temple is given land, okay, and they can rent out their land. You see, we're not dealing in dollars and cents. We're dealing in kind tribute. Okay, so like for instance, we talk about during the 20th dynasty, Ramses III, 81,000 people. You gotta feed 81,000 people. Okay, so that's why they have land. Some of the land they would rent out to lordly people who would rent out to peasants.
But how did they get paid?
In kind. That is to say, you get paid in cows, grain. They traded. The temple economy was based on agriculture, trade based on surplus of food, artifacts, livestock, of course. Tribute.
Meaning minerals and gold.
That is to say, so the king, went out and let's say that he conquered that piece of territory over there. Well, half of that are given to this temple. And they now have that land that they own, that they're going to figure out how to work that land. And the people who will work the land on a rental basis has to emit certain percentage of the produce to the temple. Right? So you have silos keeping grain for next year and the year after. In case we get a recession next year, we have grain and stuff like that. So trade. But not only that, the temples also were like service centers. Let's say that this brother here couldn't read and write, and he wanted to make a will for his children. You go to the temple and you pay him a certain amount, whether it's gold, diamonds, whatever, to write your will. Or this young man wants to court this young lady, and he doesn't have the words. You go there, they write him a letter. They say, where do people get all the words that they need? Ask Markham. So you go and you ask the people in the temple to write you a love letter for the young lady. So they are working. They're not just praying. They got that seed money that I told you about is turned over. It's turned over to, and they were generally tax-free, tax-exempt. So they didn't have to pay taxes to the state. In addition, they kept the state's money. Okay? So there was one priest, his name was Petrosiris. They caught him stealing from the temple. I mean, he was working on the side. Remember what Scarface said? I didn't challenge you. I did a little business on the side. And he was accused of stealing temple money. One of the things that in the cycle stage, when we judge before Cyrus, in the negative confessions, one of the things is, I didn't do this, I didn't steal the temple's money. I didn't steal the temple's property. I didn't do this. I didn't hate I didn't speak evil of my neighbor. So the economy was based on agriculture and trade, as well as tribute and endowments. So sometimes a nobleman was near debt and he wanted to be remembered, so he would make a donation to the temple so that every service you have call his name. And he, again, as we say, as long as we keep calling the ancestors' name, they're still among us. So all of these here in a kind of was contributed to the wealth and the economic survivability of the temple.
Okay, Zoom audience, any question from the Zoom audience? Anybody from the
Yeah, I'd
Zoom?
like to ask a question, please. Good evening, sir.
Go ahead.
I'd like, maybe, I don't know, I kind of missed some of your speech, some of your lesson tonight, but I had an idea. Who built the temples? And another one, was there any evidence that the Hebrews or Jews or, I don't know, Semites built these temples?
No.
And what race were the Egyptians? If they had a thing called race back then, kind of.
The Egyptians are African people, black African people. Don't mind what they said, okay? I was in Detroit this year here, a 2-day affair they had there, and I was with Dr. Len Jeffries, and we were sitting kicking it with some guys Friday night for Saturday. And one day he said to me, he says, we got to thank Dr. Diab because he gave us Egypt. Right? What he meant was that Diab destroyed every argument
Yes, sir.
about Egypt being European.
Yes, sir.
Right? That's why I said here, I read that little piece for you about the that the Africans built the pyramids and their temples not as slaves under the whip, but as architects and technicians.
That's right.
Scientists, mathematics. Okay, mathematics is Dr. Obama tells us that mathematics is the only living language because everything is measured. You hear something I heard on the news here. We make something like 3,500 decisions every day and stuff like that. Everything is in mathematics. And this is where mathematics begin. Mathematics begin because you got to remember, at 3100 BC, these Africans were counting in the millions. At 2100, these guys still in the caves using fire to light their place. Look, mathematics has to do with astronomy. Thoth was the god of astronomy. Todd and his daughter Sishat, those are the people who kept the numbers, right? They built the temples in heaven, the Pharaoh built the temples on earth, okay? These Africans, I want to go over. I want to go over my time because I get some. Anyway, okay. So the people of Nabta in Western Desert of Upper Egypt, right? These were. You ask a kid, who's the first scientist? What's his name? No. This guy down here, man. Einstein. The first scientists are the people from Nabta. Those are the ones who mapped the heavens. Okay, they mapped the heavens anywhere between 20,000 and 3,500. Okay, look. So I mentioned this before, I think. 2010, I took my son, and one I lost. So we went to the rally in the mall. Rally in the mall in Washington, D.C. when Obama was in the second year. And then after that, we went to hear Charles Finch III. He was hosted by Anthony Browder. So I asked him about the procession, Precession. The procession was a 26,000-year cycle of heavenly movements, right? I learned a long time ago to measure what you needed today to have two.
That's correct.
Right? So I asked him about it. He said, no. There were two we know about. So that means 52,000. Well, if you have two, it had to be measured against a third one of 78,000. Well, perhaps 4 of those, which gives you 104,000 years. Now, in 2011, again, the New York Times published this article of the discovery of a paint pot in southern Africa, a pot of red paint with a brush. I think I mentioned this last time. This has been dated at 107,000 years old in Germany, right? Now, when you think about paint pot, and you know anything about art, you see the artist sitting there, circling the pot with his brush, thinking about what I'm going to put on the wall. They say that the indication of this discovery and the implications of it is that complex thinking was pushed far back. The false interpretation as to when complex thinking began is credited to Europeans at about supposedly 40,000. Right? So now we have these Africans in South Africa thinking complexly at 107,000. Now, if they're thinking complexly at 107,000, it stands to reason it's not far-fetched if they're looking at 4 precession at 104,000, right? Our church word said that they were having what I call sweet communion with deity, that is to say, worshiping and ritualizing and getting the benefits of the Holy Spirit in you. 300,000. So the point is that we're not waiting. We weren't waiting for Livingstone and Stanley to come and discover the Africans. I mean, what's the name? Dick Gregory saying, imagine me and my old lady sitting in there and this guy comes and discovers us. Okay. The fact of the matter, sir, is that there were black African people like you and I, and despite what they're saying, in 1900, a French Egyptologist named Foucault said that the early Egyptologists had made mistakes. And Dr. Leonard James, my mentor, he said that those mistakes were purposeful. The fact of the matter is that the mistakes were never corrected. Okay? And we got to read between the lines, above the lines, to the side of the lines, below the lines, on top of the lines, so we can have the right information.
Okay.
Got you.
Yeah, can I go?
Yeah.
Okay. just want to ask with respect to, you mentioned the movie The Ten Commandments. Can you just specify how, and that was during the time of setting one,
Yeah.
when the movie was that and the whole
It
Bible.
was filmed in Arizona.
What's that?
Arizona. Yeah. I mean, not you know.
Right.
They got a couple of clips.
Right.
You know, but it was filmed in Arizona.
Right. So, if that is the case, can you just specify how the movie says that Moses went up to a mountain and came back with 10 commandments, and yet those 42 affirmations or negative confessions was done before Moses was even born. So I'm not denying those that have a faith system that says God gave it to Moses. But is it safe to say that those were in existence before there was a Moses?
Of course.
If there was a Moses.
Of course. Freud said that, raising the question as to whether in fact there was a Moses, right? These guys out in Detroit, I remember, they called Al-Kebalan.
Al-Kebalan.
Yeah, right. I knew them from way back.
Yes.
Prempeh and Pianke were. They had a magazine, right? And they published a report of a conference of rabbis in Canada. And one of them said, well, it was just a rally and cry for the day. You know, it was a rally and cry for the day. You see, the thing is that Dr. Ben has this book called Black Preachers Without a Theology, right? And he tried to show you that we live in different worlds. He said when I was about 5 years old, they took us downtown to show us, I was in the Virgin Islands, they took us downtown to show us the world's tallest building. And when we got up there, you see this 3-story building. And then I went to Puerto Rico, and I saw the world's tallest, it was 9 stories. And then my parents bring me to America, and then there was the Sears building at 105. Each one of them was a different world. We live in the Jewish world, okay? So, the first Jewish person that we know of record is Abraham. And he doesn't come on the scene until 1875. These things that you're talking about, these 10 commandments, these negative confessions, may have been as old as 7,500 years, 6,000 years or 5,000 years before these people. At the time, it's not inconceivable that Moses, who was skilled in all of the arts of the Egyptians, chose, Dr. Ben said was 144, that was written down to 42, because it represents each of the 42 nomes of Egypt. So it's not inconceivable, I don't have the information on this, but it's not conceivable that he took 10 out of the 42.
Right.
Right? And with a little Hollywood magic, we get the movie that's shown in most places and times throughout the world.
No
the
question.
10 Commandments.
No question.
Right? And it's so imprinted on people that most people tell you chapter and verse of that movie. Okay? I mean, it shows so many times, every year at a certain
Because
time.
that's what Mayor Edward I. Koch, he used that movie by Cecil B. DeMille.
Yeah.
He used that movie and said that Egyptians treated his people as if those people were there at that time, these Europeans. He said that Africans treated them so harshly, Egyptians, that's the term he used. He said Egyptians treated them so harshly, it made them build temples without straw. Because they said,
pyramids.
let me say
Yeah.
it right. Pyramids without straw, And then Dr. Jeffrey's response to Wyatt Koch is, show me one pyramid with straw in it.
Well, the pyramids are really, it's blocks of stone. You remember I was telling you that they didn't use mortar, right? Right, because they have these big blocks,
Right.
and they set one on top of the other, and it doesn't need no, it stays like that because of the weight of it,
Right.
But the pyramids, okay, the pyramids were built 2,500. I tell you that Abraham comes in the 1875, give or take, because we got to look at how dating can be problematic, right? So they tell us that Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey in 800 BC. But in 800 BC there was no Greek writing, right? The earliest Greek writing is at Abu Simbel. It's 500. Well, they would tell you that perhaps it was oral before it became written 300-400 years later. Okay, so there were a couple of pyramids built, or not the pyramid in the form as we know it that is still standing today, right? But some modifications were made to temples, to tombs, like at Deir el-Bahari, Mentuhotep, right? His tomb, which was built in his temple, which is his tomb also, supposedly, was built on different levels, on different platforms, right? And at the top of the central platform was an image that looked like a temple, like a pyramid, right? But the thing is that there was so much of overlay over the thing that unless you really can delve into the information, you get lost in the falsity of what is called fake news.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, Zoom audience, any question? Okay, we got one last question.
Yes, sister, go right ahead.
Okay, you mentioned that, the museums that you were talking about, I think one was the Louvre Museum in Paris, that's the one you...
Yeah, the Louvre, right, yeah.
I forgot to mention that one.
Yeah.
That was the one that was on your mind, right?
Yeah, right.
Museum. My question is to elaborate on your inquiry regarding the negative confessions of Annie. You made reference to the Bible, you know, that the negative confessions and the Ten Commandments, and in contrast to Shelton Heston's Ten Commandments on TV, or the Ten Commandments
Cease to be
in
the
the Bible.
middle Ten Commandments.
Cease to be, yeah, in the Bible. Well, those negative confessions, I believe, was in it part of Ma'at and the Pyramid of Annie. Am I correct?
One more question.
No.
In regards?
One more quick question.
No. That was the Book of the Dead was quote unquote the Egyptian Bible, right? Which is the instructions that were given to a deceased person
Who are the Semites?
Be quiet.
who was journeying to the judgment in the afterlife.
Right.
Okay? The priest knew, again, those people knew stuff that we would never understand. In Stone Legacy, Jim James said that the whole idea of the atom, which was named after one of the early creator gods, right? That we only know 1/5 of the evidence regarding creation.
Right.
1/5. It all we know today.
Right.
But these people knew what was going on back then. So when we try to fathom the Egyptian mind, which was in the process of development over thousands and thousands of years, we can never understand what it is that happened with them. The judgment, the belief in the theologians who crafted the negative confession that Dr. Ben said was 144, that was actually whittled down to 42.
Right.
They knew stuff that we would never understand. But the fact of the matter is that was there
Right.
before.
Yeah.
You remember I said about Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and that the earliest
Right.
Greek writing was 500, that it is very probable that either they give us the false numbers, or that it was articulated orally
Right.
and then written down there. So that's why when our church ward said that these Africans were having what I call sweet community with that, sweet communion with deity, he said it was 300,000 years they were doing this. So the crafting of these moral sanctions, that I didn't do this. You know, I want to, when I'm Karanga call it standing in front of your God. When you stand there, because you believe that, oh, everything is finished, where you know there's something going on. When the ancestors are looking in, maybe they don't want to interfere, whatever. But there's something happens when you pass on, you transition, right? And then you're now going to be asked, what did you do? Okay, so I wrote a speech when Sonny died, right? I call it Sonny at the Gates, right? And when Sonny get up there, Sonny Carson, St. Peter says, what do you do with your miserable life? It was published in the child, right? Sonny said, then he held his tongue. You know, he's a man that spoke his mouth. He said, well, you know, I did this, and St. Peter said, the two of them arguing. Stankenor said to me, wait, man, you write fiction? You know, so finally St. Peter admitted Sonny because there was you gotta read this piece, sometimes brilliance come out. But Sonny was looking over the gates, and all of these black singers were over there telling St. Peter, let him in. And he's questioning, he said, that's my job. My job is to question you as to what you did when you were down here. And finally, so you will let Sonny in. But they believe for the longest period that you need to be morally right. And their theologians crafted these admonitions that that the society will be regulated. People will live for goodness. Right? Of course, you got one guy is a thief, but not the whole society is a thief. So, that is to say, you break the law or you bend the law, whatever. But the moral purpose of these is so that man would live a righteous life.
Can I add a contribution to that? The good doctor has given you some of the historical information that's available, but there's an esoteric line in development and a hierarchy to these same questions. And when you talk about the story of Musa, Moses, in the scripture, it's like the story when you talk about Osiris and him being cut up in 14 pieces. A lot of that is allegorical to the sciences. Not that it is, but it's allegorical to celestial principles, interdimensional principles. For instance, with Moses, before he went up the mountain, he came across a master who had 7 daughters in the desert there, the priests that lived below the mountains. They did a dance before Moses of the 7 veils, the 7 colors. Those are initiatory rites to elevating to the burning bush. Esoterically, that burning bush in Islam is called a lote tree. see the priest or the initiate come before him in his shrine, bow. But after that, when he leaves the presence, and while in the presence, he has a white wig. He don't have that at all the time until he's before Osiris. When he leaves the presence of Osiris, he has his hair changed. This is where in England and the European society and in America where they wear the wig. That's an exalted right. So, to show you different demonstrations of those rights, Musa, Moses, is the name in Kemet, like you have Ramosis, Thotmosis.
Right. Well, that's why I was just getting into strictly what history can be verified as opposed to religious or esoteric things that cannot be proven, cannot be established. It's just something that's part of a belief system. You can believe it or you cannot believe it. It's simply up to that person or that group. But the history, the empirical evidence, so this is why I said, which I know cannot be refuted, is that irrespective of whether you believe there was a Moses or a Musa, there was a negative confession, and those negative confessions preceded the story of Moses by well over 1,000 years.
True.
And those are just the facts.
True.
That's all.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, give Dr. Monderson a great big hand. To the audience, I want to thank you. The audience that came out, I want to thank you. Give yourself a big hand. Thank you very much. We'll be back here in 2 more weeks, and I will put the text and let you know who's going to be speaking. So give yourself a big hand. Thank you very much. From the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr.'s History Club.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Monderson.
Thank you, Dr. Monderson.
Thank you.